Some doors don't open because they're locked. They open because someone finally decides to knock. Portland in October is not a city that tries to impress you. The rain comes in sideways, the sky stays the color of old pewter for weeks at a stretch, and the coffee shops on every corner fill up with people who seem perfectly content to sit in silence for hours, wrapped in flannels and wool, watching the water slide down the glass. Nora had lived here long enough to love that about it. There was something honest in the way the city refused to perform. It just existed, damp and green and slightly melancholy. And if you stayed long enough, you started to feel at home in the gray. She found the apartment on a Wednesday, through a listing posted on a community board at Powell's Books, the famous independent bookstore on Hawthorne Boulevard, where Nora had worked part-time since her sophomore year at the University of Oregon, an hour south in Eugene. The listing was handwritten on an index card, pinned between a flyer for a folk concert and a notice about a lost cat named Biscuit, 2-bedroom, 3rd floor, knee division. Quiet building, cheap rent, no pets, no drama. Call Gerald. Nora called Gerald that same afternoon. He was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who managed the building the way a librarian manages a quiet wing, with patience and minimal commentary. He showed her the unit on a Thursday morning, moving through the rooms with a slow, deliberate pace that suggested he'd done this many times and had long since stopped trying to sell anything. The kitchen had white cabinets and a window that looked out onto a narrow alley where someone had planted climbing roses on a trellis. The living room was small, barely big enough for a couch and a bookshelf, but the light that came through the front window on clear days was the kind of gray gold that made everything look like a painting. The bathroom door stuck slightly, requiring a firm twist of the handle. Gerald mentioned this without apology. Nora signed the lease that afternoon. She was 22, finishing her senior year in English and creative writing at UO, and her life had been reduced to its simplest possible equation: read, write, work, sleep. The apartment didn't need to be beautiful. It needed to be quiet and close to the bus line, and affordable enough that she could keep buying the good coffee at the place on S.E. Hawthorne, where the barista remembered her order without being told. Everything else, comfort, decoration, the small rituals that make a place feel lived in, she would figure out as she went. Sage moved in 3 weeks later. Nora had known her for almost 2 years. They'd met at a weekend workshop on memoir writing, hosted by a small arts nonprofit in the Alberta Arts District, the kind of neighborhood where murals covered entire building facades and vintage shops sat next to wine bars, and nobody batted an eye at anything. Sage had shown up on the first morning with a thermos of green tea and a notebook already half full of handwritten pages, and had introduced herself with a smile so genuinely warm that Nora, who was by nature a little guarded around strangers, had relaxed almost immediately. Sage was from Seattle originally. She'd moved to Portland 2 years ago to start a nursing program at OHSU, Oregon Health and Science University, perched on a hill in the southwest part of the city with a view that, on rare clear days, showed you Mount Hood in the distance like a postcard someone had forgotten to mail. She was 1 year into the program when they met, already deep in the kind of demanding coursework that turned students into people who fell asleep in coffee shops and woke up with textbook pages pressed into their cheeks. "Oh my God, Nora," Sage shouted when she appeared in the hallway with 2 enormous suitcases and a cardboard box balanced on one hip. She kicked the door open with her boot, a worn pair of Danner boots that Nora would later learn she wore everywhere, and dropped everything in the middle of the living room floor without ceremony. "This place is perfect. I love it already." Nora smiled from the kitchen, where she was unpacking mugs. "The bathroom door sticks," she warned. "Everything sticks in Portland," Sage said, grinning. "It's humidity. It's the rain. It's the city telling you to slow down." And that was how it started. Not with a grand gesture or a dramatic first impression. It started the way most important things start, quietly, without anyone noticing, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. The first few weeks were easy in the way that new roommate situations sometimes are, when everything is still a novelty, and nobody has bumped up against anyone's edges yet. Sage was a morning person in the way that Nora was not. She would wake up early, make a pot of coffee with the French press Nora kept on the counter, and sit at the kitchen table with her nursing textbooks spread out around her like a fortress, highlighter between her teeth, reading with a concentration that looked almost meditative. Nora, who didn't fully come alive until her second cup, would emerge from her room at 9 or 10, find Sage already deep in study mode, and quietly pour herself coffee without disturbing the silence. They fell into a rhythm. Sage studied. Nora wrote. Essays for class mostly, but also longer pieces she kept in a notebook she didn't show anyone. In the evenings, they ate dinner together, usually something simple. Pasta with whatever vegetables were cheap at the farmer's market on SE Division, or sandwiches assembled from the deli counter at the grocery store 2 blocks away. They talked, but not constantly. Sage told Nora about her classes, anatomy, pharmacology, the endless hours in clinical rotations at the hospital, and Nora told Sage about the books she was reading, the professors who frustrated her, the slow crawl of her senior thesis. It was comfortable. It was uncomplicated. Until the night the rain turned everything. It was a Friday in late October, the kind of Portland rain that doesn't come in drops but in sheets. A wall of water that turns the streets into rivers and makes the whole city sound like it's inside a drum. Nora had been at Powell's until closing, shelving returns and ringing up the last customers of the evening, and by the time she stepped outside, the rain was so heavy that her jacket was soaked through before she'd made it to the bus stop. She got home after 10, let herself in quietly, assuming Sage would be asleep. But when she stepped into the living room, the lamp in the corner was on, the one with the amber shade that cast everything in a warm, golden light. And Sage was on the couch, legs pulled up underneath her, a blanket draped over her shoulders. Her phone was face down on the coffee table. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't reading or scrolling or doing any of the things she usually did when she was awake. She was just sitting there, staring at nothing, with an expression on her face that Nora had never seen before. It wasn't sadness, exactly. It was heavier than that. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something has happened, the kind that sits in a room like smoke after a fire has gone out. Nora stood in the doorway for a moment, water still dripping off her jacket onto the hallway floor, and simply looked at her. Not with pity, not with the instinct to fix things or fill the silence, with recognition, with the understanding that sometimes the most important thing you can do for another person is not ask what's wrong, but simply be there. She hung up her jacket, went into the kitchen, put the kettle on. While the water heated, she found 2 mugs, the ceramic ones she'd bought at a pottery studio in Eugene, uneven and slightly lopsided and exactly the right size, and put a chamomile tea bag in each one. Her mom used to make chamomile tea on nights when the world felt too heavy. Nora had carried the habit with her like a small inheritance. She brought both mugs back to the living room and sat down on the other end of the couch. Not too close. Close enough. She handed Sage one of the mugs without speaking, and Sage took it with both hands and wrapped her fingers around it, and they sat in silence while the rain hammered against the window and the amber lamp turned the room into something that felt like a refuge. They stayed like that for a long time. The rain kept falling. The tea got warm and then lukewarm. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Nora couldn't have said exactly when, Sage's head tilted sideways and came to rest against Nora's shoulder. It wasn't a dramatic movement. It was the kind of thing that happens when someone is exhausted and has finally stopped fighting it, a slow surrender to gravity, to tiredness, to the simple human need to be close to another person. Nora went very still. Sage's breathing slowed, deepened. Within a minute, she was asleep, completely, deeply asleep. The kind of sleep that comes from genuine exhaustion rather than choice. Her face, in sleep, looked younger than it did when she was awake. The tension she carried in her jaw, in the set of her shoulders, in the slight crease between her eyebrows, all of it dissolved. Nora sat there and didn't move, didn't dare move. One hand was around her mug, the other resting on her own knee, and she was very aware of the weight of Sage against her shoulder, the warmth of her, the slow rhythm of her breathing. The rain kept falling outside. The lamp kept glowing, and Nora thought, this is just what happens. This is normal. A tired friend, a hard night, a couch that isn't quite big enough for 2 people. She told herself it didn't mean anything. But the truth she wasn't ready to look at yet, was already there, waiting. It happened again the following week, and the week after that. Not every night, not so often that Nora could call it a pattern, but often enough that she started to notice the shape of it, the way Sage would arrive in the living room late at night with some small excuse. I can't sleep. My back hurts on that mattress. It's so cold in my room. And Nora would say, of course. And the two of them would end up on the couch or in Nora's bed, close together in the dark, breathing in sync. Each time, Nora told herself the same thing. This is fine. This is what roommates do. This doesn't mean anything. Each time her heart beat a little faster than the time before, and the whole time, Sage had a boyfriend named Daniel. Daniel was back in Seattle. They'd been together for a year and a half, long enough that Sage talked about him with the easy familiarity of someone who had woven another person into the fabric of her daily life. He was a software developer, quiet and steady, the kind of guy who sent care packages and remembered small details and showed up when he said he would. By every measure Nora could think of, he was a good person. A good boyfriend. Which made the nights on the couch all the more confusing, because on those nights, in the dark, with the rain outside and the apartment wrapped in silence, Daniel didn't exist. Sage didn't talk about him, didn't check her phone, didn't seem to be anywhere other than exactly where she was, curled against Nora's side, breathing slow and even, like the rest of the world had simply fallen away. And Nora, lying there with her heart hammering and Sage's warmth pressed against her, would think, what is this? What is happening to me? November arrived. The rain intensified, and Nora started writing, not an essay, not something for class, a letter, to Sage, one she had absolutely no intention of sending. She wrote it late at night, at the kitchen table, with the rain streaking down the window and the apartment quiet around her. She wrote about the way Sage laughed. A real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep and surprised even Sage herself. She wrote about the way Sage's hair fell across her face when she was studying, and the way she pushed it back without looking, and the way Nora watched that gesture every single time and couldn't look away. The letter was supposed to be one page, a way to get the feelings out of her head and onto paper, where they could be examined and then set aside. But as Nora wrote, the words kept coming. 1 page, 2 pages, 3, and somewhere in the middle of the 4th page, the pen stopped, and Nora sat back and realized what was happening. She wasn't just attached to Sage. She wasn't just confused by the closeness or grateful for the companionship, or lonely in the way that single people sometimes are during the gray months of a Pacific Northwest winter. She was in love with her. The realization landed quietly, not like a thunderbolt, but like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. And once it was open, Nora couldn't pretend the door had never existed. If this story already hit something inside you, hit subscribe. New stories drop every week on this channel. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever shared your bed with someone and told yourself it meant nothing? Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. They'll thank you. The scariest part isn't realizing how you feel. It's realizing you can't unfeel it. Nora didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of her bed with the unfinished letter in her lap and stared at the closed door and tried to breathe without her chest feeling like it was made of glass. It was the first time she had given this thing a name, a real, specific, undeniable name. And the weight of it was startling, not because it was wrong, because it was true. Because somewhere underneath all the months of rationalizing and careful not looking, this had been growing, quietly, like something rooted in dark soil. By morning, when Sage left for her shift at OHSU, with a quick wave and a half smile, Nora was still sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and the letter hidden in her notebook. The apartment felt different after Sage left. Not empty. Full, actually, full of the residue of her presence. The thermos she'd left on the counter, the cardigan draped over the back of a chair, the faint smell of the cedar soap she used, still lingering in the bathroom. Nora picked up her phone and called her mom. Rachel lived in a small house in a suburb of Eugene, about 40 minutes outside the city, in a neighborhood where the Douglas firs grew so tall they blocked out the sky on cloudy days, which in Oregon meant they blocked out the sky most of the time. She was a high school English teacher who had raised Nora alone after Nora's dad left when Nora was 6, and she carried herself with the kind of steady, unflappable warmth that made her the person everyone, students, colleagues, neighbors, went to when they needed to feel like things were going to be okay. Rachel picked up on the first ring. "Hey, sweetheart. How's Portland?" "Mom." Nora's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I need to talk to you about something." There was a pause. Not a worried one. Just the kind that comes when a parent is shifting gears, giving their full attention. "I'm here," Rachel said. "Take your time." Nora was quiet for a long time. She didn't know how to start. Didn't know how to say what she was feeling without it becoming something that needed explaining or defending or apologizing for. So instead of saying any of that, she said, "I think I'm feeling something for someone that I wasn't expecting to feel." Another pause. And then Rachel said, calmly, simply, without any of the weight Nora had been bracing for, "Okay, tell me about them." Not her. Not him. Them. The word was so small, so neutral, so carefully chosen, that Nora felt something crack open inside her chest. She took a breath. "Her name is Sage," Nora said. "She's my roommate. She's in nursing school. And I think I'm in love with her, Mom." Rachel didn't gasp. Didn't go quiet in the way that would have meant shock or disapproval. She simply said, "Well, that sounds like it happened kind of fast." Nora laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her. "It didn't, actually. It's been a while. I just didn't want to look at it. And now you are. Now I am." "Okay," Rachel said, "then let's figure it out. But first, sweetheart, I want you to hear this. You don't have to apologize for this, not to me, not to anyone. You're feeling what you're feeling. That's not something you did wrong. That's something that happened to you, and it's a good thing." Nora stayed on the phone for another 20 minutes after that, not saying much of anything, just listening to her mom's voice. Steady and warm and certain in the way that only a mother's voice can be when she's telling you that you are going to be all right. When she hung up, she sat there for a while longer, holding the phone, and thought that Rachel was the kind of person who made the world feel survivable simply by existing in it. The days that followed were strange. Nora went about her life the way she always did. Classes, Powell's, the apartment, the slow work of her senior thesis, but everything felt slightly different now. Like she had put on a new pair of glasses, and the world had come into sharper focus. She noticed things she hadn't noticed before. The way Sage hummed while she cooked. Not any particular song, just a low, absent-minded melody that filled the kitchen like background music. The way Sage tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking hard about something. The way Sage's hand would sometimes land on Nora's arm or shoulder in conversation, a brief, casual touch that lasted exactly as long as it needed to and no longer. Each small gesture landed like a stone dropped into still water. Nora felt every ripple. But she didn't say anything. Didn't change how she acted, or how she moved through the apartment, or how she talked to Sage. She made a decision, a quiet, firm one, that what she felt was her own business. Her own private weather. Sage didn't need to know. Sage had Daniel. Sage had a life that was already full and complicated, and hard enough without Nora adding something new to it. So Nora kept the feeling inside, and carried it carefully, and told herself it was manageable. It was manageable, until the afternoon on the fire escape. The fire escape was technically an emergency exit. It was a narrow metal platform on the back of the building, accessible through the kitchen window, with a rusted railing and enough room for 2 people to sit if they didn't mind their shoulders touching. On clear days, which in Portland meant days when the rain paused long enough to remember that the sun existed, it became their unofficial outdoor space. Nora would bring out a book, Sage would bring out coffee, they'd sit side by side, feet dangling over the alley below, and watch the light change over the rooftops. It was a Saturday in early December. One of those rare days when the clouds parted, and the sun came through, and the whole city seemed to exhale in relief. Nora had brought out 2 mugs of hot chocolate from a mix she'd found at the grocery store, and they were sitting in the pale winter sunlight, watching the last of the afternoon glow touch the tops of the buildings across the street. Sage was quiet. Not the comfortable quiet they usually shared. Something heavier. She was staring at the skyline with her brow slightly furrowed, the mug held in both hands, and Nora could tell she was turning something over in her mind. "Nora," Sage said, without looking at her. Can I ask you something kind of weird?" "Sure." Sage was quiet for a beat. Then, "Do you think it's possible to care about someone a lot? Like, really a lot? And still feel like something's missing?" Nora's stomach dropped. She kept her eyes on the skyline, kept her breathing even, kept her voice steady when she answered, "Yeah. I think that happens more often than people admit. Caring about someone and loving someone aren't always exactly the same thing. Sage nodded slowly. I've been with Daniel for almost 2 years, she said. And he's genuinely good, Nora. He's kind, and he shows up, and he doesn't do anything wrong. But sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, and I feel like I'm missing something, like there's a piece of me that's somewhere else. Nora said nothing. She couldn't say anything. If she opened her mouth right now, she was going to say something she couldn't take back. I don't know what that means, Sage said, quietly. I'm just trying to figure it out. There was a long silence. The sun moved behind a cloud, and the warmth went out of the air, and they sat there with their cooling mugs, and the city spread out below them, and the question hanging between them, like something you could almost touch. Then Sage turned her head and looked at Nora. It was a look that lasted longer than it should have. Longer than a look between friends usually lasts, and in it, Nora saw something she had been looking for without knowing she was looking. Something that felt less like a question and more like an answer, a flash of recognition, of seeing and being seen at the same time. Then Sage smiled, small, a little nervous, a little hopeful, and looked back out at the skyline, and the moment passed. But it left a mark on Nora, a quiet, permanent one, like a watermark on paper, invisible to most people, but there if you held it up to the light. The nights on the couch continued through December. The touching continued, and Nora each time lay in the dark and felt the same thing, the slow, terrifying certainty that this was going somewhere, that it had been going somewhere for a long time, and that neither of them had any intention of stopping it. You're not alone in feeling this way. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Comment below. What's the scariest thing you've ever kept hidden from someone you loved? Tag someone in the comments who would need this story in their life right now. Courage doesn't always look like bravery. Sometimes it looks like 2 people sitting on a bench, finally deciding to stop pretending. December passed in a haze of rain and study, and the slow, quiet accumulation of moments that Nora kept in her chest, like letters in a box. Sage studied for her end-of-semester exams with a ferocity that was almost frightening. Anatomy, pharmacology, clinical skills assessments, and Nora tried to stay out of the way while also making sure there was always coffee on the counter and something to eat within reach. On a Tuesday night, 2 weeks before finals, Sage came home from a phone call with Daniel and sat on the couch in silence for a long time. Nora, who had been reading in her room, came out and found her there, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around her own legs, staring at the wall with an expression that Nora couldn't quite read. It wasn't grief. It was more like confusion, the look of someone who had been following a map and suddenly realized the road didn't match. Nora sat down beside her without asking. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that only exists between 2 people who have already learned, without ever discussing it, how much space the other one needs. After about 15 minutes, Sage said, "He wants me to come up to Seattle for Christmas, stay with his family." "And you don't want to go," Nora said. It wasn't a question. Sage looked at her. "Is that a terrible thing to say?" "No," Nora said. "It's an honest thing to say. Those are different." Sage nodded. Didn't say anything else, but something shifted in the room, something Nora could feel but couldn't quite name. Like a weather system changing, like the air before a storm. Sage didn't go to Seattle for Christmas. She stayed in Portland, studied, spent Christmas Day at Nora's mom's house in Eugene, where Rachel made too much food and asked Sage exactly the right number of questions, curious, but never intrusive. And Sage smiled more that afternoon than Nora had seen her smile in weeks. January came. The rain got heavier. Sage passed her exams, and then, in the second week of January, on a Saturday afternoon that started out ordinary and became something else entirely, everything changed. It started because Sage said she needed to get out of the apartment. She had been home for 3 days straight, studying for a clinical placement test. And by Saturday morning, the walls were clearly closing in. "Let's go somewhere," she said, standing in the kitchen with her coffee, looking out the window at the sky like she was trying to negotiate with it. "Where?" Nora asked. "Anywhere." "I don't care. Somewhere with air." They walked to Laurelhurst Park, about 20 minutes from the apartment, a wide green space with tall Douglas firs and a duck pond and benches scattered along the paths like something out of a novel. The January air was cold, but the rain had stopped, at least for the moment, and weak winter sunlight filtered through the trees in thin, golden shafts that made the park look like it was lit from within. They found a bench near the pond, a weathered wooden one, slightly damp from the morning mist, and sat down. Sage pulled her jacket tighter around herself and tilted her face up toward the weak sunlight, closing her eyes. For a few minutes they just sat there, listening to the ducks and the distant sound of traffic and the occasional bird call echoing through the trees. Nora watched Sage in profile, the curve of her jaw, the way her dark hair fell against her coat collar, the way her eyelashes caught the light, and felt the familiar ache that had lived in her chest since October. She looked away, out at the pond, and breathed. It was Sage who broke the silence. "Nora." Her voice was different, quieter than usual, and with something underneath it, a tremor so small that Nora almost missed it. "Yeah?" Sage opened her eyes, turned her head, and looked at Nora with an expression that Nora would carry with her for the rest of her life. It wasn't nervousness, exactly. It was courage, the specific, rare kind of courage that exists in the moment right before you say something that will change everything. The moment when you've already decided, and the only thing left is to do it. "I need to tell you something," Sage said. "And I need you to know that I've been thinking about this for a really long time." Nora's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She turned to face Sage fully. "Okay," she said. "I'm listening." Sage took a breath. A real breath. Deep and deliberate. The kind you take when you need every ounce of air you can get. And then she said, "I think I've been falling for you. For a while now. And it's not something I can keep pretending isn't happening." The park didn't stop. The ducks kept swimming. The sunlight kept filtering through the trees. The world went on exactly as it always had. But inside Nora's chest, something enormous and quiet shifted, like a stone that had been wedged in place for months finally coming loose. She looked at Sage, at the way her hands were clasped together in her lap, slightly tight. At the way her eyes, dark and wide and more vulnerable than Nora had ever seen them, were searching Nora's face for something. Permission, maybe, or just the reassurance that she hadn't just made the biggest mistake of her life. "Sage," Nora said. Her voice was calm, calmer than she felt. "I need you to know something." "What?" "I've been feeling the same way, since October. Maybe before that." Nora paused, breathed. "I just didn't think you felt it too." Sage stared at her. For one full second, her expression didn't change. And then, slowly, like dawn arriving after a night that went on too long, she smiled. It wasn't the big, bright smile that Sage gave the world. It was smaller than that, quieter. A smile that looked like it belonged only to this moment, only to Nora, and was so genuinely beautiful that Nora felt her eyes sting with tears she didn't fully understand. They didn't kiss. Not there. Not on that bench in the middle of a public park. Not because they were ashamed, because the moment felt too important for that. Too rare. It deserved space to breathe before anyone tried to move it forward. They walked back to the apartment in silence. But it was a different silence than any that had come before. Not the silence of two people avoiding something, but the silence of two people who had finally said the thing that needed saying, and were still feeling the shape of it. When they got inside, Sage closed the front door and stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at Nora with that same mix of courage and relief, like someone who had been holding her breath for months and had finally let it out. "Can I hug you?" Sage asked. And the way she asked it, simply directly, like it was the most natural thing in the world, made Nora feel like her heart was going to crack open. She didn't answer with words. She crossed the hallway in 2 steps and opened her arms. Sage walked into them and held on. Not a quick hug, a real one. The kind that says everything words can't. Sage pressed her face into Nora's shoulder, and Nora wrapped both arms around her, one hand finding its way into Sage's hair, fingers moving slowly and gently. They stood like that for a long time, long enough that the light shifted on the hallway floor, long enough that the radiator kicked on and filled the small space with warmth, and neither of them moved. Nora, with her chin resting on top of Sage's head, closed her eyes. And for the first time in months, maybe for the first time in her life, she felt completely, utterly at peace. That evening, they sat on the couch with a movie playing that neither of them watched. Sage curled against Nora's side, her head resting against Nora's shoulder, and Nora's hand moved through her hair, not absently, the way it had before, but with intention, with care, like something precious being held gently. "Nora," Sage whispered, half asleep already. Thank you for waiting for me." Nora looked down at her, at the way the lamplight touched her face, at the way her whole body had gone soft with trust, and thought, "I would have waited longer, I would have waited forever," but what she said was simpler. "Always," she said, and meant it. This is the kind of story that stays with you. Hit that subscribe button if it's already working. Leave a comment. What's the bravest thing you've ever done? Or the bravest thing you're still too afraid to do? Share this video. Somewhere out there, someone is waiting to feel seen. I don't need everyone to understand. I just need the people who matter to try. The morning after everything changed, Nora woke up to find a note on the kitchen counter, written in Sage's handwriting on the back of a grocery receipt. "Went to get bagels from that place you like on Division. Not going anywhere. Ever. S." Nora read it 3 times, then she laughed. A real, surprised laugh that echoed in the small kitchen, and put the note in the pocket of her jacket, where it stayed for the rest of the week. The first thing Sage did on a Sunday afternoon was call Daniel. It wasn't an easy conversation. Nora didn't listen. She walked to the coffee shop on the corner and sat by the window with a latte and a book she didn't read, giving Sage the space to say what needed to be said in private. She came back after an hour. Sage was on the couch, phone in her lap, eyes slightly red, but not devastated. The expression on her face was something Nora recognized, the particular kind of relief that comes after a difficult thing has been done. "How did it go?" Nora asked, sitting down beside her. "Okay," Sage said. He was sad, obviously, but he wasn't cruel about it. He said he'd felt something was off between us for a while. She paused. He was actually really decent about the whole thing. Nora didn't know what to say, so she did what she'd learned worked best. She stayed. She put her arm around Sage's shoulders, and Sage leaned into her, and they sat like that for a while. And the rain started again outside, and the apartment felt like the safest place in the world. The days and weeks that followed brought with them the complicated, messy, beautiful business of letting the rest of the world in. Nora told her mom first. Not by phone this time, in person. She drove down to Eugene on a Saturday morning, Sage beside her in the passenger seat, and pulled up to Rachel's house just after noon. Rachel was in the garden, wearing muddy boots and a flannel shirt, pruning something with a pair of loppers. She looked up when the car pulled in, smiled, and set the loppers down. "Mom," Nora said, getting out of the car, "this is Sage. She's not just my roommate anymore." Rachel looked at Sage, looked at Nora, and smiled. Not a surprise smile, not a careful one. A genuine, warm smile, like someone who had been waiting for good news and had finally heard it. "Well," Rachel said, wiping her hands on her pants and extending one toward Sage. "It's so good to finally meet you properly. Come inside. I've been making soup all morning and there's way too much of it for one person." Sage laughed, that real laugh, the one that came from somewhere deep, and took Rachel's hand, and something in the air shifted. The afternoon unfolded warmly. Soup and bread, and conversation at Rachel's kitchen table, which was cluttered with books and lesson plans, and a ceramic mug that said, "World's Okayest Mom" in faded letters. Rachel asked Sage about nursing school, about Portland, about the apartment. She asked Nora about her thesis. She didn't make a big deal of anything. Didn't treat the situation as extraordinary. She just treated them like 2 people she was happy to see. It was, Nora thought, exactly what both of them needed. Sage's family was harder. Her parents lived in Seattle, her dad worked in tech, her mom in education, and they were good people, by every measure Nora could see. But good people don't always find it easy to adjust to news that doesn't match the picture they've been building in their heads for 22 years. Sage called her mom first. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. When Sage hung up, she was quiet for a long time, sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in her lap, staring at nothing. She didn't take it badly, Sage said eventually, but she didn't take it well either. She said she needs time to process. Nora nodded. She understood that. She knew what it meant when someone who loved you needed time. It didn't mean they loved you less. It meant they were adjusting the map of who you were in their mind, and that kind of adjustment didn't happen overnight. She'll get there, Nora said. How do you know? Sage asked. Because she called you back, Nora said. That's the part that matters. 2 weeks later, Sage's mom, her name was Karen, called again. This time the conversation was shorter, and at the end of it, Karen said something that made Sage go very still and then smile. She wants to come visit, Sage told Nora afterward, next month. She said she wants to see where I live. All of it, Nora asked carefully. Sage looked at her. All of it. The visit happened on a gray Saturday in February. Karen arrived at the apartment with a small suitcase and a bag of groceries. The kind of gesture that said, I want to be useful more than anything else. She was a tall woman, with Sage's same dark hair but cut short, and an expression that was trying very hard to be open, even though Nora could see the effort it took. The afternoon was quiet. Karen looked around the apartment, at the bookshelves, the mismatched mugs on the counter, the photos pinned to a corkboard near the kitchen, with careful attention, not judging, trying to understand. When her eyes landed on a photo of Nora and Sage on the fire escape, both of them laughing at something, the Portland skyline smudged in the background, she looked at it for a long time. You look happy, Karen said, to Sage. Simply, without weight. I am, Sage said. Karen nodded, looked at the photo one more time, and then turned to Nora and said, thank you for taking care of her. It wasn't a full acceptance. Nora could feel that, could feel the distance between where Karen was and where she needed to be. But it was a step, a real one. And sometimes, Nora thought, a step is everything. The world outside the apartment wasn't always so kind. At Powell's, most of Nora's coworkers were unsurprised and supportive. It was, after all, a bookstore in Portland. And the staff skewed toward people who had already seen and accepted most of the ways a person could be. But at school, the reactions were more mixed. Not hostile, mostly. Just the full spectrum of human responses to something that didn't fit neatly into everyone's expectations. One evening, Nora and Sage went to a reading at a literary bar near campus, a long, narrow place called the Inkwell, with exposed brick and mismatched chairs and shelves of used books lining every wall. A visiting author was reading from a new novel, and Nora had been looking forward to it all week. They stood near the back, close together, and Nora was holding a glass of sparkling water when a group of guys at the bar started staring. It was the kind of staring that comes with commentary. Nora couldn't hear all of it, but she could feel the shape of it, the smirks, the nudges, the kind of low-grade hostility that doesn't announce itself loudly, but fills a room like cigarette smoke. Sage's hand tightened around Nora's. Nora felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp, and opened her mouth to say something, but someone else got there first. An older woman, maybe mid-40s. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of calm authority that comes from having spent decades not tolerating nonsense, stepped out from behind the bar where she'd been talking to the bartender. She walked directly up to the guy who'd been loudest, looked him in the eye, and said very evenly, "You're in a bookstore. If you can't manage basic decency in a place full of books, I'd suggest you leave." The guy looked at her, looked at Nora and Sage. Something in his expression shifted. Not remorse, exactly, but the dawning awareness that he was outnumbered, and he turned and walked back to his friends without another word. The woman turned to Nora and Sage and smiled. Not a pitying smile, a human one. "Enjoy the reading," she said, and walked away. Nora never learned her name, but she thought about her for days afterward. Thought about how the world wasn't always kind, but it wasn't always cruel either. That sometimes, when you least expected it, a stranger would step forward and remind you that decency still existed, that you weren't alone. The next morning, Sage looked at Nora over coffee and said, "You know what? I'm done letting people like that take up space in my head. Yeah? Nora said. Yeah. Sage smiled. The real one. The small one. The one that was only ever for Nora. Because I'm with exactly the person I want to be with. And that's worth more than anything they could say. Nora looked at her, at the conviction in her voice, at the steadiness in her eyes, and felt something settle inside her chest. Something that felt like the end of fear. Or at least, the beginning of not caring about it anymore. The apartment on any division felt different after that. Not physically. The walls were the same, the couch was the same, the bathroom door still required the twist. But something in the air had changed. It was as though the space had finally become what it was always meant to be. Not just a place where two people lived, but a place where two people had figured out who they really were, and had chosen each other because of it. Nora kept writing, not just stories for class, longer pieces now, fragments of life that she captured throughout the day. The way Sage laughed when something genuinely surprised her, the way morning light came through the kitchen window and turned the coffee mugs into small golden things, the way Portland looked from the fire escape at dusk, when the clouds went pink and the city felt, for just a moment, like it belonged to them alone. And it was one of those fragments, one of those small, honest, carefully observed pieces that won her the prize. The Oregon Literary Award for Emerging Writers was something Nora had known about since her junior year and had never entered. It felt too large, too presumptuous, like something meant for people who had already figured out who they were as writers, and Nora was still in the process of becoming one. Every year she told herself maybe next time, and every year next time slipped by without her submitting anything. It was her thesis advisor, Dr. Margaret Walsh, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who wore her reading glasses on a chain around her neck and had the directness of someone who had spent decades telling students the truth, who finally pushed her over the edge. Submit, Dr. Walsh said, after a conference about Nora's thesis, with a simplicity that left no room for argument. You have real talent, Nora. I'm not saying that to be encouraging. I'm saying it because it's true. Nora submitted 3 pieces. 3 stories she had written since October, all of them shaped in one way or another by what she felt for Sage, by the process of learning to see herself clearly, by the slow, terrifying work of being honest. She won. Not first place, second. But she won. And when the email arrived, on a Tuesday afternoon, in the library at UO, surrounded by students who had no idea what was happening at her table, Nora read it twice, set her phone down, and sat perfectly still for a full minute. Then she picked it up and texted Sage. I won. Sage called back in 4 seconds. What? Nora, oh my God. Nora laughed so hard that the guy at the next table looked up with mild concern. She didn't care. That night, back at the apartment, they celebrated the way 2 broke graduate students celebrate. Chips and sparkling cider from the bodega on the corner, and a movie Sage picked, some romantic comedy that Nora pretended to find too cheesy but secretly loved. They were on the couch, Nora's legs draped across Sage's lap, when Sage leaned over and kissed her. It was their first kiss, and it was nothing like the movies. It wasn't dramatic or desperate or perfectly timed. It was careful, the way you'd hold something fragile. 2 people learning the shape of each other, even though they'd been learning it all along. When they pulled apart, Sage's hands were still on either side of Nora's face, fingertips resting just below her jaw. Sage's eyes were bright, not from tears, but from something that looked like wonder. I've wanted to do that for a long time, Sage said. Nora smiled, looked at her, and said, Me too. The apartment on any division seemed to breathe in that moment, like the walls had been waiting for this. Main stories like this exist because people like you keep showing up. Subscribe and keep coming back. Comment below. From which city are you watching this? Let's see where this community reaches. If this meant something to you, share it. That's how we build something real together. I didn't need a map to find you. I just had to stop looking in the wrong direction. February in Portland was the kind of month that tested whether you actually loved the rain or just thought you did. It fell every single day, sometimes light, sometimes in sheets, sometimes in that particular sideways mist that was less rain than atmosphere. The apartment on any division was perpetually damp in a way that had become, over the months, almost comforting. Like the moisture in the air was part of the fabric of their life now, part of the texture of being home. Nora and Sage had been together for just over a month, and the strange thing was how little had actually changed, and how much everything had. The days looked the same from the outside. Sage still studied with that fierce, almost athletic concentration. Textbooks fanned out across the kitchen table. Highlighters organized by color. Nora still wrote in the mornings, still worked at Powell's on weekends, still made coffee in the French press, and left a mug on the counter for Sage without being asked. They still ate dinner together, still sat on the couch in the evenings, still fell asleep near each other, the way they always had. But the texture of everything was different now. The silences were different. Warmer, fuller, less weighted with things unsaid. The touches were different. No longer accidental or deniable, but deliberate. A hand on the small of the back. Fingers intertwined while they walked. A kiss on the temple. Quick and casual. The kind that happens when you've stopped being careful and started